Produced by Liang Gu, Lu Sun's famous chapters. Lu Sun, 1881–1936, whose courtesy name was Henkai, was originally named Zhou Shuren, and was a native of Shaoxing, Zhejiang. A great modern Chinese writer, thinker, and revolutionary. 1. From Baichao Garden to Sanwei Bookstore. There is a large garden behind my house, which is said to be called Baichao Garden. Now it has been sold together with the house to Zhu Wengong's descendants. Even the last meeting has been separated by 7 or 8 years. It seems that there are only some weeds in it. But it was my paradise then. But it was my paradise then. Needless to say, there are green vegetable beds, smooth stone well railings, tall acacia trees, and purple mulberries, not to mention chirping. Cicadas sing in the leaves, fat wasps lie on the cauliflowers, and they call the emperor, skylark, suddenly. Straight from the grass. Gone into the sky. The surrounding short mud walls alone are infinitely interesting. The oil flies sing here, and the crickets play the piano here. Gone into the sky. The surrounding short mud walls alone are infinitely interesting. The oil flies sing here, and the crickets play the piano here. When turning over broken bricks, you will sometimes encounter centipedes. There are also cantharides. If you press it with your fingers, its backbone will snap. A burst of smoke erupts from the posterior orifice. Polygonum multiflorum vine and magnolia vine are intertwined. Magnolia has a lotus-like fruit, and Polygonum multiflorum has swollen roots. Some people say that Polygonum multiflorum root has the shape of a human being. If you eat it, you can become an immortal. So I often pull it up. The roots were pulled out constantly, and the mud walls were damaged, but I never saw a single root that looked like a human being. If you are not afraid of thorns, you can also pick raspberries, which are like small balls made of small coral beads. They are sour and sweet, and the color and taste are far better than mulberries. You can't go into the long grass because it is said that there is a big red snake in the garden. My eldest mother once told me a story. Previously, there was a scholar who lived in an ancient temple and studied in the courtyard. At night, he was enjoying the cool air in the courtyard. Suddenly he heard someone calling him. He agreed, and when he looked around, he saw a beautiful woman's face exposed on the wall. She smiled at him and then disappeared. He was very happy, but the old monk who came to talk at night discovered the trap. He said that there was something evil about his face. He must have met a beautiful snake. This is a monster with the head of a human and the body of a snake. It can call people by name. If they agree, they will come to eat the person's flesh at night. He was naturally frightened to death, but the old monk said it was okay and gave him a small box, saying that as long as he put it next to his pillow, he could sleep peacefully. He did it anyway. But I can't sleep, of course I can't. In the middle of the night, it really came, rustle. There was the sound of wind and rain outside the door. While he was shaking, he heard a crack, and a golden light flew out from the pillow. There was no sound outside, and the golden light flew back. Trapped in a box. What happened next? Later, the old monk said that this was a flying centipede, which could suck the brains of snakes, and the beautiful snake was killed by it. The lesson at the end is, so if a strange voice calls your name, you must not answer it. This story makes me feel the dangers of being a human being. I am often a little worried when I enjoy the coolness on a summer night and dare not look at the wall. This story makes me feel the dangers of being a human being. I am often a little worried when I enjoy the coolness on a summer night and dare not look at the wall. Moreover, I desperately want to get a box of flying centipedes like the old monk. I often think this way when I walk to the grass in the herb garden. But, until now, I haven't gotten it yet, but I haven't met the red snake and the beautiful snake either. Strange voices calling my name are naturally common, but they are not beautiful snakes. The Baichao garden in winter is relatively tasteless. When it snows, it becomes completely different. Take a picture of the snowman. People need to appreciate it by printing their full shape on the snow, and shaping the snow arhat. This is a deserted park and inaccessible, so it is not suitable, so we have to come to catch birds. Thin snow is not enough. It must be covered with snow for a day or two, and the birds have nowhere to feed. Sweep away a piece of snow to expose the ground. Use a short stick to prop up a large bamboo sieve. Scatter some grains underneath. Tie a long rope to the stick, and hold it from a distance to watch the birds come to peck at it. When I walked under the bamboo sieve, I pulled the rope and covered it. But what we got were mostly sparrows, and there were also white-cheeked, zhangfei birds, which were very irritable and couldn't be raised at night. This is the method taught by Runta's father, but I am not very good at using it. I obviously saw them entering, so I pulled the rope and ran to take a look, but there was nothing there. It took me a long time. Only 3 or 4 were caught. Runta's father was able to catch dozens of them at a young age, put them in fork bags, scream and hit them. I once asked him the reasons for gains and losses, and he just laughed quietly and said, "You are too impatient and don't have time to wait for it to come to the middle." I don't know why my family sent me to a private school, which is also known as the most severe school in the city. Maybe it was because the mud wall was destroyed by pulling out Polygonum multiflorum, or maybe it was because the bricks were thrown to the Liang family next door. Maybe it was because he jumped down from the stone well railing. I don't know. All in all, I won't be able to go to Baichao Garden often. Ade, my crickets. Maybe it was because he jumped down from the stone well railing. I don't know. All in all, I won't be able to go to Baichao Garden often. Ade, my crickets. Ade, my raspberries and magnolias. Going out to the east, within half a mile, you cross a stone bridge. This is my husband's home. Enter through a black bamboo door, and the third room is the study. There is a plaque hanging in the middle saying, Sanwei Bookstore. Below it is a painting, with a very fat Sika deer lying under the old tree. There is no Confucius tablet. We saluted the bien and the deer. The first time was considered as worshipping Confucius, and the second time was considered as worshipping Mr. When he saluted for the second time, the gentleman responded kindly to the side. He is a tall, thin old man with grizzled beard and hair, and he wears big glasses. I respect him very much, because I have heard long ago that he is a very upright, simple and knowledgeable person in this city. I don't know where I heard it from, but Dongfang Shua is also very knowledgeable. He knows a kind of insect called guizai. I would like to know this story in detail. But Ah Chang doesn't know, because she is not knowledgeable after all. Now that I have the opportunity, I can ask Mr. Sir, what's going on with this weird bug? I asked quickly when I was about to step down after taking the exam. I don't know. He seemed very unhappy, with an angry look on his face. Only then did I realize that students should not ask these things. As long as they are studying, they are profound scholars. As for those who don't know are those who don't want to talk. This is often the case with people who are older than me. I have met them several times. I just read, practice calligraphy at noon, and review classes in the evening. My husband was very strict with me in the first few days, but then he got better and recovered. However, he gradually read more books to me, and gradually added more words to his lectures, from 3 words to 5 words, and finally to 7 words. There is also a garden behind Sanway bookstore. Although it is small, you can climb up the flower bed there to pick off winter-sweet flowers and look for cicadas to shed on the ground or on the sweet-scented osmanthus tree. There is also a garden behind Sanway bookstore. Although it is small, you can climb up the flower bed there to pick off winter-sweet flowers and look for cicadas to shed on the ground or on the sweet-scented osmanthus tree. Too many classmates had been in the garden for too long, and it was no longer possible. The teacher shouted in the study, "Where have everyone gone?" People then walked back one by one, together. It's not possible to go back. He had a ruler, but he didn't use it often, and he also had rules for punishing him by kneeling. But it's not often used. Usually he just stares a few times and says loudly, "read." So everyone opened their throats and read for a while, and it was really loud. Some people think benevolence is far away. I want to be kind and benevolent. Some people think laughing at a man with missing teeth means a dog's sinuses are wide open. Some people think, don't use the 9 hidden dragons. There are those who recite under the earth, above and below. There are gongbamo, tangerine and pomelo. Mr. himself also reads. Later, our voices lowered, became quiet, and passed away. Only he was still reading aloud, There are those who recite under the earth, above and below. There are gongbamo, tangerine and pomelo. Mr. himself also reads. Later, our voices lowered, became quiet, and passed away. Only he was still reading aloud, Tai Rui, commanding so suavely, everyone was shocked. Jean Boluo, upside down and dripping, thousands of cups not drunk yet, I suspect this is an excellent article, because after reading this, he always smiles, and raises his head, shakes it, and twists it back. When Mr. is absorbed in reading, it is very suitable for us. Some of them used paper armor to put on their nails and put on a show. I was a painter, using a kind of paper called Jingchuan paper, to trace the embroideries in the novel one by one, just like shadowing when practicing calligraphy. The more books I read, the more pictures I draw. But the books are not finished. There are many achievements in painting. The most complete ones are the embroidery portraits of Deng Ko-ji and Journey to the West, both of which have a large volume. Later, because I needed money, I sold it to a rich classmate. His father ran a tin foil shop. I heard that he has now become a shop owner. And he is about to reach the status of a gentleman. This thing no longer exists. September 18th, 2. Mr. Fujino, Tokyo is nothing more than this. When the cherry blossoms in Ueno are in full bloom, they look like light crimson clouds. But the flowers are also indispensable for the crash course of groups of Qing students studying abroad, with big braids on their heads, so that the top of the student hats rises high, forming a Mount Fuji. There are also those whose braids are untied and tied flat, and the hat is removed, and the oily shine can be seen. It's like a little girl's bun, and she has to twist her neck a few times. It's really beautiful. There are a few books to buy in the concierge of the Chinese Students Association, and sometimes it's worth a visit. If it's morning, you can still sit in some of the bungalows inside. But by evening, the floor of one room would often make a loud thumping noise, and the room would be filled with smoke and dust. Ask someone who is well versed in current affairs, and they would say, "That's learning to dance. Go and see somewhere else." Look, how about it? I will go to the medical college in Sendai. Departing from Tokyo, I arrived at a post station soon and wrote, Nipperi. Somehow I still remember the title. Secondly, I only remember Mito, which is the place where Mr. Zhu Shunshui, a survivor of the Ming dynasty, died. Sendai is a small town. It is extremely cold in winter. There are no Chinese students yet. Perhaps it's because hope is more valuable than anything else. When the cabbage from Beijing is shipped to Zhejiang, the root is tied with a red rope and hung upside down in front of the fruit shop, revered as glue cabbage. The aloe vera that grows wild in Fujian is brought into the greenhouse as soon as it arrives in Beijing, and is euphemistically called agave. I also received such preferential treatment when I arrived in Sendai. Not only did the school not charge tuition, but several staff members also took care of my room and board. I first stayed in an inn next to the prison. It was already quite cold in early winter, but there were still a lot of mosquitoes. Later, I covered my whole body with a quilt and wrapped my head and face with clothes. Leave only 2 nostrils to breathe out. In this place where breathing is endless, mosquitoes have no way to interrupt, and they sleep peacefully. The food isn't bad either. But a gentleman thought that this inn also provided meals for prisoners and it was not suitable for me to live there. He said this again and again. Although I felt that it was irrelevant to me that the inn also provided meals for the prisoners, but it was hard to resist such good intentions, so I had no choice but to find a suitable place to stay. So I moved to another house, which was far away from the prison. Unfortunately, I always had to drink taro soup that was hard to swallow every day. From then on, I saw many strange teachers and heard many new lectures. Anatomy is divided between 2 professors. Originally osteology. At that time, a dark and thin gentleman with a mustache and glasses came in, holding a stack of large and small books. As soon as he placed the book on the podium, he introduced himself to the students in a slow and frustrated tone, "My name is Fujino Jinkuro." A few people behind him laughed. He then talked about the history of the development of anatomy in Japan. Those books, large and small, are works on this subject from the beginning to the present. At first, a few books were thread-bound. There were also Chinese translations. Their translation and research on new medicine were no earlier than China's. The person sitting in the back laughing was a repeater who failed last school year. He had been in school for a year and was quite familiar with the story. They then lectured the freshmen on the history of each professor. Mr. Fujino is said to be too immodest in his clothes. Sometimes he even forgets his tie. He wears an old coat in winter and is shivering. Once when he got on the train, the conductor suspected that he was a pickpocket and told the passengers in the car to be careful. What they say is probably true. I personally saw him once in class without a tie. A week later, around Saturday, he sent his assistant to call me. When I arrived at the research room, I saw him sitting among human bones and many individual skulls. He was studying the skulls. Later, a paper was published in the school's magazine. "Can you copy my lecture notes?" he asked. "You can copy a little. Bring it to me." I handed over the lecture notes I copied, and he accepted them. He returned them to me the next day or 3 and said, "From now on, I will give it to him once a week." When I took it down and opened it, I was surprised, but also felt uneasy and grateful. It turns out that my lecture notes have been revised with red pen from beginning to end, and many omissions have been added. Even the grammatical errors were corrected one by one. This continued until he finished teaching the subjects he was responsible for: osteology, vascular science, and neurology. It's a pity that I didn't work hard at that time and was also very willful at times. I still remember one time when Mr. Fujino called me into his laboratory, pulled out a picture from my handout, which showed the blood vessels of the lower arm, pointed at it, and said kindly to me, "Look, you moved this blood vessel a little bit, naturally, this way. It does look better, but anatomical diagrams are not art. The real thing is the same and we can't change it. Now I've changed it for you. From now on, you have to follow the drawing on the blackboard." But I was still not convinced. I agreed verbally, but thought in my heart, I still draw the pictures well. As for the actual situation, I naturally remember it in my heart. After the test in the school year, I went to Tokyo for a summer and returned to school in early autumn. The results had already been announced. Among more than 100 classmates, I was in the middle. But he didn't fail. This time, Mr. Fujino's assignment was anatomy practice and regional anatomy. After practicing anatomy for about a week, he asked me to go again. He was very happy and said to me in a very restrained tone, "I heard that Chinese people respect ghosts very much, so I was very worried because I was afraid that you would not dissect the corpse. Now I am finally relieved that this is not the case. But he also sometimes makes me very difficult. He heard that Chinese women have their feet bound, but he didn't know the details. So they asked me how to wrap my feet, and what kind of deformity my foot bones had become, and they sighed, 'You have to take a look to find out what is going on.' One day, the student council officer at this level came to me. I came to the apartment and wanted to borrow my lecture notes. I checked it out and gave it to them. But they only checked it once and didn't take it away. But as soon as they left, the postman delivered a very thick letter. When I opened it and read it, the first sentence was, "Repent." This is a sentence from the New Testament, but recently quoted by Tolstoy. This was during the Russo-Japanese War. Mr. Tuo wrote a letter to the emperors of Russia and Japan, which began with this sentence. Japanese newspapers criticized him for being disrespectful, and patriotic youths were also angry. However, secretly they had long been influenced by him. Secondly, roughly speaking, the topic of last year's anatomy test was marked in Mr. Fujino's lecture notes, and I knew it in advance, so I was able to achieve such results. The end is anonymous. I just recalled something that happened a few days ago. Because there is a peer meeting to be held. The clerk wrote an advertisement on the blackboard. The last sentence was, "Please count them all so that they don't miss anything." He also added a circle next to the word "missing." Although I thought it was ridiculous at the time, I didn't mind it at all. Only now did I realize that the word was also mocking me. It is said that I got the problem revealed by the teacher. I informed Mr. Fujino about this matter. Several classmates who were familiar with me were also very dissatisfied, and went to accuse the clerk of the rudeness of pretexting the inspection, and asked them to publish the results of the inspection. Finally, the rumor was eliminated, but the clerk tried his best to withdraw the anonymous letter. In the end, I returned the Tolstoyan letter to them. China is a weak country, so of course the Chinese are imbeciles, with a score of over 60 points. It is not their own ability, no wonder they are doubtful. But then I had the fate of visiting and shooting Chinese people. In the second year, Tian taught mold science. The shapes of bacteria were all shown on film. The paragraph was finished, but the get out of class was not over yet. There were a few movies about current events, and naturally they were all about Japan's victory over Russia. There were a few movies about current events, and naturally they were all about Japan's victory over Russia. But there were Chinese people caught in it. I worked as a detective for the Russians, was captured by the Japanese army, and was about to be shot. A group of Chinese people were watching around me. There was also me in the lecture hall. Long live! They all clapped and cheered. Such cheers are common in every film I watch, but to me, this one was particularly harsh. After that, when I returned to China, I saw those people who were just watching the execution of prisoners, and they were cheering like they were drunk. Wow. Unthinkable. But at that time and place, my opinion changed. At the end of the second academic year, I went to find Mr. Fujino and told him that I would not study medicine and leave Sendai. Unthinkable. But at that time and place, my opinion changed. At the end of the second academic year, I went to find Mr. Fujino and told him that I would not study medicine and leave Sendai. His face seemed a little sad, and he seemed to want to speak, but he didn't. I want to study biology, and the knowledge my husband taught me is still useful. Actually, I didn't decide to study biology, because I saw him a little sad, so I told a lie to comfort him. Teaching anatomy for medicine and so on. Being afraid of biology doesn't help much either. He sighed. A few days before he left, he asked me to come to his home and handed me a photo. There were 2 words written on the back, farewell, and he also said that he hoped to give mine to him. But I didn't have time to take pictures at this time. He then told me to take the photo and send it to him in the future, and he would also send letters to him from time to tell him about the future situation. After I left Sendai, I hadn't taken any photos for many years, and because the situation was boring, talking about it would only disappoint him, so he was afraid to even write a letter. More and more years have passed and I have no words to talk about, so although I sometimes want to write a letter, I find it difficult to write. Until now, I have not sent a letter or a photo. From his side, it seemed that there was no news since he left. But somehow, I always remember him. Among all the teachers I consider him, he is the one who makes me most grateful and encourages me. Sometimes I often think, his enthusiastic hope for me and tireless teachings are, in short, for China, and he hopes that China will have new medicine. Generally speaking, it is for academic purposes, and I hope that new medicine will be spread to China. His character is great in my eyes and heart, although his name is not known to many people. I once bound the lecture notes he corrected into 3 thick volumes and kept them in my collection. It will serve as a lasting memorial. Unfortunately, when I moved house 7 years ago, a book box was destroyed and half the box of books was lost. It happened that these lecture notes were also lost. I asked the Transportation Bureau to look for it, but there was no reply. Only his photograph is still hanging on the east wall of my Beijing residence, opposite my desk. Whenever I feel tired at night and want to be lazy, I look up and catch a glimpse of his dark and thin face in the light, as if he is about to speak in a measured tone, and I suddenly wake up to my conscience. And I had more courage, so I lit a cigarette and continued to write some words that were deeply hated by the gentleman and others. October 12, 3, Kong Iji. The layout of hotels in Lu Town is different from other places. They all have a large square-shaped counter on the street. There is hot water prepared in the cabinet, so you can warm the wine at any time. Workers, after taking a break from work in the afternoon and evening, would spend 4 copper coins each time to buy a bowl of wine. This happened more than 20 years ago, and now each bowl costs 10 copper coins, and stand against the counter. Have a warm drink and rest, if you are willing to spend an extra penny. Then you can buy a plate of salt-cooked bamboo shoots or fennel beans to drink with. If you pay more than 10 cents, you can buy a meat dish. But these customers are mostly from the short-clothed gang and are probably not so wealthy. Only those wearing long gowns walked into the house next to the store and asked for wine and food. Sit and drink slowly. I have been working as a waiter in the Xianheng Hotel at the entrance of the town since I was 12 years old. The shopkeeper said that I looked too stupid and was afraid that I would not be able to serve the long-gown customers, so I just did something outside. The short-coated patrons outside are easy to talk to. But there are also quite a few people who are nagging and confusing. They often have to watch with their own eyes the rice wine being scooped out of the jar, see if there is water at the bottom of the pot, and see if the pot is placed in hot water. Then they can rest assured, under such severe supervision, the water is also in trouble. So a few days later, the shopkeeper said again that I couldn't do it. Fortunately, the person who recommended me was so kind that I couldn't be fired, so I was assigned to the boring job of warming wine. From then on, I stood at the counter all day long, focusing on my duties. Although there is no dereliction of duty. But I always feel a little monotonous and boring. The shopkeeper had a fierce face, and the patrons were not friendly either, and he was not lively. Only when Kong Yiji came to the shop could he laugh a few times, so I still remember it. Kong Yiji was the only person standing drinking and wearing a long gown. He is tall and tall, with a pale complexion and often scars between his wrinkles, and a shaggy gray beard. Although he was wearing a long gown, it was dirty and torn. It seemed that it had not been mended or washed in more than 10 years. When he talks to people, he is always full of words. Teach people half-understood things. Because his surname was Kong, others nicknamed him Kong Yiji from the semi-understandable words, Master Kong Yiji, written on the red paper. As soon as Kong Yiji arrived at the shop, all the drinkers looked at him and smiled, and some shouted, Kong Yiji. You have a new scar on your face. He didn't answer, but said to the cabinet, I'll warm 2 bowls of wine and ask for a plate of fennel beans. Then they paid out 9 cents of money. They shouted loudly and deliberately, You must have stolen someone else's thing again. Kong Yiji opened his eyes wide and said, How can you accuse someone of innocence out of thin air? What innocence? I saw you stealing the He family's books the day before yesterday and beating them while hanging. Kong Yiji blushed, veins popped out on his forehead, and argued, Stealing a book cannot be considered stealing a book. Can what happens to a scholar be considered stealing? There were words that were difficult to understand one after another, such as, a gentleman is poor, he is so, etc., which caused everyone to burst into laughter. The atmosphere inside and outside the store was full of joy. I heard people talking about it behind their backs. Kong Yiji used to be educated, but in the end he didn't go to school and he couldn't make a living. As a result, he became poorer and poorer, until he was about to beg for food. Fortunately, if I write a good word, I will pay for someone else's book in exchange for a bowl of rice. It's a pity that he has another bad temper, that is, he likes to drink and is lazy to do things. Within a few days, people, books, papers, pens, and inkstones all disappeared. How many times? There is no one who asked him to give money to the book. Kong Yiji had no choice but to steal from time to time. But in our store, his conduct is better than others, that is, he never defaults on arrears. There is no one who asked him to give money to the book. Kong Yiji had no choice but to steal from time to time. But in our store, his conduct is better than others, that is, he never defaults on arrears. Although he sometimes has no cash, and temporarily writes it down on the pink board, he will definitely pay it off within a month. Kong Yiji's name was wiped off the pink board. Kong Yiji drank half a bowl of wine, and his flushed face gradually recovered. Someone else asked again, Kong Yiji, do you really know how to read? Kong Yiji looked at the person who asked him, showing an air of disdain to argue. They then continued. How come you can't even get half a scholar? Kong Yiji immediately looked depressed and uneasy, his face was covered with a layer of gray, and he said some words. This time it was all nonsense, some of which he did not understand. At this time, everyone burst into laughter. The atmosphere inside and outside the store is full of joy. At these times, I can laugh along, and the shopkeeper will never blame me. Moreover, when the shopkeeper met Kong Yiji, he would always ask him this question, which made people laugh. Kong Yiji knew that he could not talk to them, so he had no choice but to talk to the children. Once he said to me, "Have you read the book?" I nodded slightly. He said, "If you have read the book, I will give you a test. How do you write the word fennel for fennel beans?" I thought, is a person like begging worthy of taking my test? Then he turned around and ignored him. Kong Yiji waited for a long time. I said sincerely, "Can't you just write it? I'll teach you, remember. These words should be memorized. When you become a shopkeeper in the future," I said sincerely, "Can't you just write it? I'll teach you, remember. These words should be memorized. When you become a shopkeeper in the future, you will need to use them when writing accounts." I secretly thought that I was still far from the shopkeeper's level. And our shopkeeper never pays the account for fennel beans. It's funny and impatient. He answered lazily, "Who wants you to teach me? Isn't it just the word, hui, that goes back and forth under the grass?" Kong Yiji looked extremely happy, tapped the long nails of 2 fingers on the counter, nodded and said, "Yes. Yes. There are 4 ways to write the word, hui, do you know?" I am getting more and more impatient. Walk away with your mouth open. Kong Yiji had just dipped his nails in the wine and wanted to write something on the cabinet. When he saw that I was not enthusiastic, he sighed again, showing a very regretful look. Several times, the neighborhood children heard the laughter and joined in the fun, surrounding Kong Yiji. So he gave them fennel beans to eat. 1 per person. After the child finished eating the beans, he still stayed with his eyes looking at the plate. Kong Yiji panicked, stretched out his fingers to cover the plate, bent down and said, "Not much, I don't have much anymore." He straightened up and looked at the beans again, shook his head and said, "Not much, not much. Not much. Really? Not much." So the group of children dispersed amid laughter. Kong Yiji makes people happy in this way, but without him, others would live like this. One day, about 2 or 3 days before the Mid-Autumn Festival, the shopkeeper was slowly checking out, taking off the pink board, and suddenly said, "Kong Yiji has not been here for a long time. I still owe 19 cents. I also felt that he really hadn't come for a long time." A drinker said, "How could he come? He broke his leg." The shopkeeper said, "Oh. He always steals. This time, it was me who fainted. He actually stole it to Ding Ju's house." Can his belongings be stolen? What happened next? How about it? First I wrote my plea, and then I was beaten. I was beaten for most of the night, and then my leg was broken. What happened next? Then I broke my leg. How about the discount? How? Who knows? Sue is dead. The shopkeeper stopped asking and continued to settle his accounts slowly. After the Mid-Autumn Festival, the autumn wind is getting cooler day by day, and it is almost early winter. I have to put on a cotton-padded jacket even if I rely on the fire all day. During the second half of the day, there wasn't a single customer, so I just sat there with my eyes closed. Suddenly I heard a voice, "Warm a bowl of wine." Although this voice was very low, it was very familiar. When I looked, there was no one at all. Standing up and looking outside, Kong Iji was sitting under the counter facing the threshold. His face is dark and thin, and he has lost his appearance. He wears a torn jacket. He crossed his legs, put a cattail bag underneath, and hung it on his shoulders with a straw rope. When he saw me, he said again, "Warm a bowl of wine." The shopkeeper also stretched out his head and said, "Kong Iji." He crossed his legs, put a cattail bag underneath, and hung it on his shoulders with a straw rope. When he saw me, he said again, "Warm a bowl of wine." The shopkeeper also stretched out his head and said, "Kong Iji, you still owe me $19. Kong Iji looked up dejectedly and replied, "I'll pay it off next time. The wine should be good." The shopkeeper smiled and said to him as usual, "Kong Iji, you stole something again." But this time he was not very argumentative and just said, "Don't make fun of me, make fun of?" If he didn't steal, how could he break his leg? Kong Iji whispered, "Fall, fall, fall." The look in his eyes. It's a lot like begging the shopkeeper not to mention it again. At this time, several people had gathered, and both he and the shopkeeper laughed. I warmed the wine, took it out, and placed it on the threshold. He took out 4 large coins from his ragged pocket and put it in my hand. I saw that his hands were full of mud. It turned out that he had walked here with these hands. After a while, he finished his drink, sat down and slowly walked away with his hands amidst the laughter of others. From then on, Kong Iji was not seen for a long time. At the end of the year, the shopkeeper took off the pink board and said, "Kong Iji still owes 19 yuan. On the Dragon Boat Festival of the next year, he said again, "Kong Iji still owes 19 yuan. Kong Iji still owes 19 yuan. But I didn't say anything about him until the Mid-Autumn Festival, and I didn't see him until the New Year's Eve. I finally haven't seen him until now. Probably Kong Iji is indeed dead." March 1919. 4. Young Runtu. A golden full moon hangs in the deep blue sky. Below is the sandy land by the seaside, where endless green watermelons are planted. Among them is a boy of 11 or 12 years old, wearing a silver ring around his neck and holding a steel fork in his hand, stabbing at a harpoon with all his strength. Na Yuan twisted her body and escaped from his crotch. This young man is Runtu. When I met him, he was only over 10 years old, which was about 30 years ago. At that time, my father was still alive and my family was well off, so I was just a young master. That year, in my family, there is a big sacrifice for the new year. It is said that this sacrifice only happens once every 30 years, so it is very solemn. During the first month of the year, there are many offerings to the ancestors, and the sacrificial vessels are very particular. There are also many worshippers, and the sacrificial vessels must be guarded against theft. My family only has one busy month. There are 3 types of workers here. Those who work for a certain family throughout the year are called long-term workers. Those who work for a certain family on a daily basis are called short-term workers. Those who also farm their own land and only come to work for a certain family during the new year, holidays and rent collection time, it's called a busy month, and I can't get enough of it. He then told his father that he could ask his son Runtu to take charge of the sacrificial vessels. My father agreed. I was also very happy, because I had heard the name Runtu a long time ago, and knew that he and I were the same age, born in the leap month, and the 5 elements lacked earth, so his father called him Runtu. He can pretend to be a bird and catch small birds. I therefore look forward to the new year every day. When the new year arrives, Runtu will also arrive. Finally, at the end of the year, one day, my mother told me that Runtu was coming, so I ran to see her. He is in the kitchen, with a round purple face and a little felt hat on his head. There is a bright silver collar around his neck, which shows that his father loves him very much and is afraid that he will die, so he made a wish in front of gods and Buddhas and tied him with the collar. He is very shy when meeting people, but he is not afraid of me. He talks to me when there are no other people around. So within half a day, we became familiar with each other. We didn't know what we were talking about at that time. I just remember that Runtu was very happy, saying that he saw many things he had never seen before after going to the city. The next day, I asked him to catch birds. He said, "This can't be done. It will only be possible if it snows heavily." It snowed on our sandy ground, so I cleared out a clearing, used a short stick to prop up a big bamboo plaque, and scattered the grain. When I watched the birds come to eat, I pulled the rope tied to the stick from a distance. The bird is covered under the bamboo plaque. There is everything: rice chicken, horned chicken, swan, blue-backed. So I looked forward to snowing again. Runtu said to me again, "It's too cold now. Come to us in the summer. We go to the beach to collect shells during the day. There are red and green ones, there are also ghosts, and there are also guanine hands. At night, we go to the beach to collect shells. Dad and I will take care of the watermelons, and you will take care of the thieves, too." No. If a pedestrian is thirsty and picks a melon to eat, it is not considered stealing here. The ones to take care of are badgers, pigs, hedgehogs, and harpies. Under the moon, listen, there is a crackling sound, and the turtle is biting the melon. Then you squeezed the hoocha and walked gently. I didn't know what this so-called animal was at the time, and I still don't know it now, but I just felt it looked like a puppy and was ferocious for no reason. Doesn't he bite? There's a hoocha here. When you get there, when you see a harpoon, just bite it. This beast is very smart. He ran toward you, but escaped from your crotch. His fur is as smooth as oil. I never knew that there are so many new things in the world. There are such colorful shells on the beach. Watermelons have such dangerous experiences. I only knew that he was sold in the fruit shop. In our sandy land, when the tide is coming, there are many jumping fish, just jumping, with 2 legs like frogs. Ah! There are endless strange things in Runtu's heart, and they are all mine. They don't know something that their usual friends don't know. In our sandy land, when the tide is coming, there are many jumping fish, just jumping, with 2 legs like frogs. Ah! There are endless strange things in Runtu's heart, and they are all mine. They don't know something that their usual friends don't know. When Runtu was at the seaside. Like me, they all only saw the sky at the four corners of the high wall in the yard. Unfortunately, the first month passed and Runta had to go home. I was so anxious that I burst into tears. He also hid in the kitchen, crying and refusing to go out, but he was finally taken away by his father. He later asked his father to bring me a pack of shells and some nice bird feathers. I also gave him things once or twice, but we never met again. 5. Hometown. I braved the severe cold to return to my hometown, which is more than 2,000 miles away, and I have been away for more than 20 years. Since it was late winter, as we approached my hometown, the weather became gloomy again. The cold wind blew into the cabin with a whistling sound. Looking out from the slit, I saw a few desolate deserted villages far and near under the pale yellow sky. Lively. My heart couldn't help but feel sad. Ah! Isn't this the hometown I remember from time to time in the past 20 years? The hometown I remember is nothing like this. My hometown is much better. But if I were to remember his beauty and describe his good qualities, I would have no images or words. It seems like that's it. So I explained to myself, the same is true in my hometown, although there is no progress, it may not be as sad as I feel. This is just a change in my own mood, because I am not in a good mood when I return to my hometown this time. I came here specifically to say goodbye to him this time. The old house where we have lived together as a family for many years has been sold to another family member. The deadline for handing over the house is only this year. Therefore, we must hurry up before the first day of the first lunar month to say goodbye to the familiar old house and stay away from the familiar places. Hometown, move to a different place where I am looking for food. The next morning I arrived at the door of my house. Many broken stems of dead grass on the corrugated roof were shaking in the wind, explaining why this old house would inevitably change owners. The main family who lived a few rooms away had probably moved out, so it was very quiet. I arrived outside my house. My mother had already come out to greet me, and then my 8-year-old nephew Hunger flew out. My mother was very happy, but she also had a lot of desolation in her face. She taught me to sit down, rest, and drink tea, not to mention moving. Hunger has never seen me. Standing opposite from a distance just watching. But we finally talked about moving. I said that the apartment outside had been rented, and I bought a few pieces of furniture. In addition, I had to sell all the wooden furniture in the house and add more. Mother also said yes, and the luggage has been gathered. Most of the wooden items that were difficult to move were sold, but the money could not be collected. You can rest for a day or two and visit your relatives and family, and then we can leave. Mother said. Yes. And Runtu, every time he comes to my house, he always asks about you and wants to see you. I have informed him of the approximate date of your arrival, and he may be coming soon. At this time, a magical picture suddenly flashed in my mind. A golden full moon hung in the deep blue sky, and below was the sandy land on the seaside. There are endless green watermelons growing in them. Among them is an 11 or 12-year-old boy with a silver ring in his neck and a steel fork in his hand. He tries his best to stab a harpoon, but the harpoon twists his body and turns around. Escaped from his crotch. This young man is Runtu. When I met him, he was only over 10 years old, which was about 30 years ago. At that time, my father was still alive and my family was well off, so I was just a young master. That year, my family held a big sacrifice for the new year, 3. It is said that this sacrifice only comes once in more than 30 years. Therefore, it is very solemn. During the first month, ancestor images are offered. There are many offerings, the sacrificial vessels are very particular, there are many people worshipping, and the sacrificial vessels must also be guarded against theft. My family only has one busy month. There are 3 types of workers here. Those who work for a certain family throughout the year are called long-term workers. Those who work for others on a daily basis are called day laborers. Those who also farm their own land and only come to work for certain people during the new year, festivals and rent collection periods are called busy months. When he was too busy, he told his father that he could call his son Runtu to take care of the sacrificial vessels. My father allowed it. I am also very happy, because I have heard the name Runtu for a long time, and I know that he is the same age as me, born in the leap month, and the 5 elements lack earth, so his father called him Runtu. He can pretend to be Gong Jing, to catch small birds. I therefore look forward to the new year every day, and the new year will arrive. Runtu has arrived. Finally, at the end of the year, one day, my mother told me that Runtu was coming, so I ran to see her. He is in the kitchen, with a round purple face, a small felt hat on his head, and a bright silver collar around his neck. This shows that his father loves him very much. Afraid of his death, he made a wish in front of gods and Buddhas and trapped him with a circle. He was very shy when meeting people, but he was not afraid of me. He would talk to me when no one else was around, and within half a day, we became familiar with each other. We didn't know what to talk about at that time. I just remember that Runtu was very happy, saying that after going to the city, he saw many things he had never seen before. The next day, I asked him to catch birds. He said, "This can't be done. It must snow heavily." It snowed on our sandy ground, so I cleared out a clearing and used a short stick to prop up a large bamboo plaque. When I sow the grain and watch the birds come to eat, I just pull the rope tied to the stick from a distance, and the bird is covered under the bamboo plaque. There are everything: rice chickens, horned chickens, swans, blue-backed. So I looked forward to snowing again. Runtu said to me again, "It's too cold now. Come to us in the summer. We go to the beach to pick up shells during the day. There are red and green ones, there are ghosts, and there are guanin hands. My father and I will take care of the watermelon tonight, and you will go too. Do you care about thieves?" "No." A walker who was thirsty picked a melon and ate it. We don't count stealing here. The ones to take care of are badgers, pigs, hedgehogs, and harpies. Under the moon, listen, there is a crackling sound, and the eagle is biting the melon. Then you squeezed the hucha and walked gently. I didn't know what this so-called sun was at that time. Even now I don't know, I just feel like a puppy and very ferocious for no reason. Doesn't he bite? There is a harpoon. When you come and see a harpoon, you stab it. This beast is very smart. It runs towards you, but it escapes from under the crotch. His fur it's as slippery as oil. I never knew that there were so many new things in the world. There were such colorful shells on the beach. Watermelons had such dangerous experiences. I only knew that he was sold in the fruit shop. In our sandy land, when the tide is coming, there are many jumping fish just jumping. They all have 2 legs like frogs. Ah! There are endless strange things in Runtu's heart, which are all unknown to my usual friends. They don't know some things, when Runtu was at the seaside. Like me, they all only saw the sky at the 4 corners of the high wall in the yard. Unfortunately, the first month passed and Runta had to go home. I was so anxious that I burst into tears. He also hid in the kitchen, crying and refusing to go out, but he was finally taken away by his father. He later asked his father to bring me a pack of shells and some nice bird feathers. I also gave him things once or twice, but we never met again. Now that my mother mentioned him, all my memories of my time here suddenly came to life like lightning. It seems that I have seen my beautiful hometown. I responded. That's great. How? Him. His situation is also very unsatisfactory. Mother said and looked outside the room, these people are here again. I said I was buying wooden utensils, so I just took them away. I have to go take a look. Mother stood up. Out. There were several women's voices outside the door. I invited Hunger to come closer and chat with him. I asked him if he could write and if he was willing to go out. Shall we go by train? Let's go by train. Where's the boat? Take the boat first, ha. It looks like this. The beard is so long. A sharp and strange sound suddenly shouted. I was startled and quickly raised my head, only to see a woman in her 50s with protruding cheekbones and thin lips standing in front of me, her hands on her hips, no skirt on, and her feet spread wide. Like a compass with tiny legs in a drawing instrument. I was stunned. Don't you recognize me? I even hugged you. I was even more stunned. Fortunately, my mother also came in and said from the sidelines, he has been away for many years and has forgotten all about it. You should remember, she said to me. This is sister-in-law Yang across the door. She owns a tofu shop. Oh, I remember it. When I was a child, there was indeed a Mrs. Yang sitting in the tofu shop diagonally across the door all the time. Everyone called her Tofu Shisher. But she wore white powder and her cheekbones were not so high. The lips are not that thin, and I sit all day long, and I have never seen such a compass-like posture. At that time, people said, because of this, the business of this tofu shop is very good. But probably because of my age, I wasn't influenced by it at all, so I completely forgot about it. However, the compass was very uneven, showing a look of disdain, as if mocking the French for not knowing about Napoleon and the Americans for not knowing about Washington. He sneered and said, "Forgot? This is really a noble person. Then there is such a thing, I stood up in fear and said, "Then, let me tell you. Brother Sun. You are rich and it is cumbersome to move. If you want these broken wooden utensils, let me take them. Our small family needs it. I am not rich. I have to sell these, and then go." Ah, you have built a Taoist platform, and you still say it's not big enough? You now have 3 concubines. When you go out, you will see a sedan with 8 lifts. How can you say it is not rich? Scared, nothing can be hidden from me. I knew I had nothing to say, so I shut up and stood silently. The richer I am, the more I refuse to relax. The more I refuse to relax, the richer you become. Companion turned around angrily, said something coquettishly, walked out slowly, stuffed a pair of my mother's gloves into the waistband of his trousers, and went out. After that, my family and relatives from nearby came to visit me. While I was socializing, I took some time to pack some luggage. This went on for 3 or 4 days. One day it was a very cold afternoon. After lunch, I was sitting drinking tea. I felt someone came in outside, so I turned back to look. When I saw it, I couldn't help but be very frightened. I stood up in a hurry and walked towards it. This is Runtu. Although I knew it was Runtu as soon as I saw it, it was not the Runtu in my memory. His body had doubled in size, his previously round purple face had turned sallow and had deep wrinkles, his eyes were swollen and red like his father's. I know that this is generally the case for people who farm by the sea and are exposed to the sea breeze all day long. He wore a broken felt hat on his head, and only a very thin cotton coat on his body, which was wrapped around his body. He was holding a paper bag and a long pipe in his hand. The hand was not the red and round hand I remembered, but it was thick, clumsy and cracked, like pine bark. I was very excited at this time, but I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "Ah, Brother Runtu, you are here?" I then had a lot to say. I want to pour out words like a string of words, horned chicken, jumping fish, shells, quail, etc. But I always feel like I am being blocked by something, just spinning in my head and unable to spit it out. He stood still, with a look of joy and desolation on his face. He moved his lips but made no sound. His attitude finally became respectful, and he shouted clearly, "Sir." I seemed to shudder. I knew that there was already a pathetically thick barrier between us. I was also speechless. He turned around and said, "Shui Sheng, kowtow to the master." Then he dragged out the child hiding behind him. This was exactly the same Runtu from 20 years ago, but he was thinner and had no silver ring around his neck. This is the 5th child. He has never seen the world, and he is hiding and hiding. The mother and Hunger came downstairs, and they probably heard the sound. Old lady. The letter was received early. I really like him very much. When I know that the master is back. Runtu said. "Ah, why are you so polite? Didn't you call me brother before?" "Still the same, Brother Sun," my mother said happily. "Ah, the old lady is really, what kind of rule is this?" I was a child at that time and was ignorant. Runtu said, and asked Shuisheng to come up and do some arching, but the child was shy and clung to his back. "Is he Shuisheng?" I was a child at that time and was ignorant. Runtu said, and asked Shuisheng to come up and do some arching, but the child was shy and clung to his back. "Is he Shuisheng?" The 5th one? They are all strangers, so it is no wonder that they are afraid of them. Hunger should go for a walk with him. Mother said. Hunger heard this. Then he came to recruit Shuisheng, but Shuisheng went out with him happily. His mother asked Runtu to sit down. He hesitated for a while, then finally sat down, leaned the long pipe against the table, handed over the paper bag, and said, "There is nothing much in winter. I can dry the dried green beans at home. There." "Please, sir," I asked him about his situation. He just shook his head. "It's very difficult. The 6th child also helps, but there is always not enough food, and there is no peace, everything requires money, there are no regulations, and the harvest is bad. When you grow something and sell it, you always have to donate money several times and lose the money. If you don't sell it, it will just rot." He just shook his head. Although there were many wrinkles on his face, it was completely motionless, like a stone statue. He probably just felt bitter, but he couldn't describe it, and he was silent for a while. Then, he picked up the pipe and started smoking silently. His mother asked him, Knowing that his family was busy with affairs and he would have to go back tomorrow, and he hadn't had lunch yet, he asked him to go to the kitchen and eat fried rice. He went out. My mother and I both lamented his situation: many children, famine, heavy taxes, soldiers, bandits, officials, and gentry, all of which made him look like a puppet. My mother told me that anything that does not need to be moved can be given to him and he can choose for himself. In the afternoon, he picked up several things: 2 long tables, 4 chairs, a pair of incense burners and candlesticks, and a lifting scale. He wants all the ashes again. We cook rice here by burning straw, and the ashes can be used as fertilizer for the sand. When we set off, he used the boat to carry us there. During the night, we talked some more, all of which were insignificant. The next morning, he took Shui-Sheng back. Another 9 days passed and it was our departure date. Runtu arrived in the morning. Shui-Sheng did not come with him, but he only took his 5-year-old daughter to take charge of the boat. We are busy all day long and have no time to chat. There were also many visitors, some seeing off and some picking up things. There are people who see you off and pick up things at the same time. By the time we got on the boat in the evening, all the shabby, large and small things in the old house had been swept away. As our boat moved forward, the green mountains on both sides of the bank turned into a deep dark color in the dusk. Continuously retreat to the stern of the boat. Hunger and I were leaning against the boat window, looking at the blurry scenery outside. He suddenly asked, "Uncle, when will we come back?" "Come back? Why do you want to come back before you leave?" "But Shui-Sheng invited me to play at his house." He opened his big black eyes and thought dreamily. My mother and I were also a little confused, so we brought up Runtu again. Mother said that the lovely sister-in-law Yang, who had been visiting our house every day since packing her luggage, was found in the ashes the day before yesterday. They took out more than a dozen dishes and after discussing it, they decided that Runtu had buried them. He could move them back home together when the ashes were being transported. When Erseo Yang found out about this, she took great credit for it. So he took the dog and killed it. This is the equipment we use to raise chickens here. There was a fence on the wooden plate, which contained food. The chickens could reach in and peck, but the dogs couldn't. They could only watch and get angry. He ran away as fast as he could. Thanks to his small feet, he could run like this. Quick. The old house is getting farther and farther away from me. The mountains and rivers of my hometown are gradually moving away from me, but I don't feel any nostalgia. I just felt that there were invisible high walls around me, which isolated me and made me very depressed. The image of the little hero with the silver collar on the watermelon field was very clear to me. Now it suddenly becomes blurry, which makes me very sad. Mother and Hunger both fell asleep. I lay down and listened to the gurgling sound of water under the boat, knowing that I was walking my way. I thought, I am so isolated from Runtu, but our descendants are still the same. Isn't Hunger missing Shui-Sheng? I hope that they will no longer be like me and become estranged from each other. However, I don't want them to live like my hard work just because they want to be the same, nor do I want them to live like Runtu's hard work and be numb. I don't want to live in vain like other people's hard work. They should have a new life, one that we have not lived. I thought of hope and suddenly became afraid. When Runtu asked for the incense burner and candlestick, I also secretly thought that he always worshipped idols and never forgot them. Now what I call hope isn't it also an idol made by myself? It's just that his wish is close, while my wish is far away. I am in a haze. A piece of green sand by the sea spread out in front of you, with a golden full moon hanging in the deep blue sky above. I think, hope does not matter whether it exists or not. This is just like the road on the earth. In fact, there is no road on the earth, but when more people walk on it, it becomes a road. January 1921. 6. Social opera. In the last 20 years, I have only watched Chinese opera twice. In the first 10 years, I would never watch it because I had no intention or opportunity to watch the opera. Those 2 times came later. 10 years later, he left without seeing anything. The first time was when I first arrived in Beijing in the first year of the Republic of China. A friend said to me that Beijing opera is the best. Why don't you go and see the world? I think going to the theater is fun, especially in Beijing. So they all ran to the garden happily, and the play had already begun. I also heard the sound of winter outside. We walked in, and several red and green ones flashed in front of my eyes, and then I saw many heads under the stage. Then I looked around carefully, and saw that there were still a few empty seats in the middle. When I squeezed past to sit down, another someone commented on me. Because my ears were already ringing, I tried my best to hear him say, "There is someone, no." We retreated to the back, and a man with very smooth braids came to lead us to the side and pointed out a position. This so-called status person turns out to be a bench. However, his seat is 3/4 narrower than my upper legs, and his feet are more than 2/3 longer than my lower legs. I didn't have the courage to climb up at first, and then I thought of the torture tools of lynching, and I couldn't help but walk out in horror. After walking for a long time, I suddenly heard my friend's voice saying, "What happened?" I turned around, and it turned out that he had also been brought out by me. He was very surprised and said, "Why do you always leave and refuse to agree?" I said, "Friend, I'm sorry, my ears are only ringing in winter." Didn't hear you. Every time I thought about it later, I felt very strange. It seemed that the play was too bad, otherwise it would be that I was not suitable for living off the stage recently. I forgot that year for the second time. In short, it was to collect donations for the Hubei flood disaster, and Tan Jingtian, too, was not dead yet. The way to donate is to buy a theater ticket with 2 yuan, and you can go to the first stage to watch the theater. In short, it was to collect donations for the Hubei flood disaster, and Tan Jingtian, too, was not dead yet. The way to donate is to buy a theater ticket with 2 yuan, and you can go to the first stage to watch the theater. Most of the actors are famous actors, one of which is Xiao Jingtian. However, it seems that some good people took the opportunity to tell me some dafa that God must not ignore. So I forgot about the disaster of winter in previous years and went to the first stage, but about half of it was because I bought the tickets at a high price and had to use them to feel comfortable. I inquired that it was too late for the stage to be announced, but the first stage had a new structure. There was no need to compete for seats, so I felt relieved and postponed my visit until 9 o'clock. Unexpectedly, as usual, everyone was full, and it was difficult to even stand. I had to squeeze in the crowd in the distance to watch an old lady singing on the stage. The old lady had 2 igniting paper twisters stuck in her mouth, and there was a ghost soldier next to her. It took me a lot of thinking before I suspected that he might be Mullian's mother, because later a monk came out. But I don't know who the famous actor is. I asked the fat gentleman squeezed to my left. He glanced at me sideways as if he was looking down on him and said, "Gong Yunfu, 4." I felt ashamed of being shallow and careless, and my face felt hot. At the same time, I made a decision in my mind to never ask again, so I looked at Xiao Dan sings. Watch Hua Dan singing, watch old students singing, watch unknown characters singing, watch a large group of people fighting randomly, watch 2 or 3 people fighting each other, from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, from 11 o'clock to 11 at 11:30, from 11:30 to 12 o'clock, yet the call to heaven has not come yet. I have never waited for anything so patiently, and the heavy breathing of the fat gentleman next to me, the whistling sound of winter on the stage, the swaying of red and green colors, plus 12 o'clock, suddenly made me realize it's no longer suitable to live here. At the same time, I mechanically turned around and squeezed out. I felt that the back was already full. The elastic fat gentleman must have spread his right half in my empty space. There was no way back for me, so I naturally squeezed and squeezed again and again, and finally got out of the gate. Except for the cars waiting for spectators, there were almost no pedestrians on the street. However, there were more than a dozen people watching the show with their heads held high at the gate. There were also a bunch of people standing not watching anything. I thought they were probably watching of the women who came out after the show. But the sky has not come yet. However, the night air is very refreshing, which is really called refreshing. It seems that this is the first time I have encountered such good air in Beijing. This night was the night I said goodbye to Chinese opera, and I never thought of him again. Even if we occasionally pass by the theater, we are indifferent. Mentally, we are already in the south of the sky and in the north of the earth. But a few days ago, I accidentally saw a Japanese book. Unfortunately, I forgot the title and author. In short, it was about Chinese opera. One of the articles seems to say that Chinese opera involves loud banging, shouting, and jumping, which makes the audience dizzy. It is not suitable for theaters, but if it is in a loose place in the wild, it will look different from a distance. Of style. I felt at the time that this was exactly what I had said but had not thought of, because I did remember watching a very good play in the wild. I felt at the time that this was exactly what I had said but had not thought of, because I did remember watching a very good play in the wild. After arriving in Beijing, I went to the theater twice in a row. Maybe I was influenced by the atmosphere at that time. Impact. It's a pity that I don't know how to do it. I actually forgot the title of the book. As for when I watched a good show, it was actually far away. I was probably only 11 or 12 years old at that time. Our custom in Luzhen is that if a married daughter is not yet the head of the family. In the summer, I usually go back to my mother's house to spend the summer. Although my grandmother was still healthy at that time, my mother had already shared some of the housework, so she could not go back to the province for many days during the summer period. I had to take time to stay for a few days after sweeping the tomb. At this time, I stayed with my mother at my grandmother's house every year. That place is called Pingxiao Village. It is a very remote village near the river not far from the sea. There are less than 30 households, all of them farm and fish, and there is only one small grocery store. But in my promised land. Because not only do I get preferential treatment here, but I can also avoid saying Zitsizigan Yu Yunanshan 5. There were many children playing with me. Because of the distant visitors, they all got permission from their parents to reduce their work and accompany me to play. In a small village, the guests of one family are almost the same as those of the public. We are all of the same age, but in terms of seniority, we are at least uncles, and some of us are also grandfathers, because they all have the same surname in the whole village and belong to the same family. However, we are friends, even if we occasionally argue. After beating the grandfather, no one in the village, old or young, would be able to think of the word offender, and 99% of them were illiterate. What we do every day is probably to dig up earthworms, put them on small hooks made of copper wire, and then lie down on the river bank to catch shrimps. Shrimps are idiots in the water world. They are not afraid to use their two pincers to hold the tip of the hook and bring it to their mouth, so they can catch a big bowl in less than half a day. As usual, this shrimp belongs to me. The second step is to go herding cattle together. But perhaps because they are higher animals, oxen and buffaloes are bullies and dare to bully me, so I never dared to get close, so I had to follow them and stand at a distance. At this time, the children no longer forgave me for knowing how to read Sitsizigan, but they all laughed at me. As for what I was most looking forward to there, it was going to Zhaozhuang to see the theater. Zhaozhuang is a larger village 5 miles away from Pingxiao village. Pingxiao village is too small to be able to act on its own, so the total amount paid to Zhaozhuang every year is counted as a joint venture. At the time, I didn't think about why they had to act every year. Now I think about it, maybe it was the spring competition or a social opera. 6. In this year when I was 11 or 12 years old, I had been waiting for this date. Unexpectedly, this year it was a pity that the boat could not be called in the morning. There is only one large ship in Pingxiao village that leaves early and returns late. There is absolutely no reason to keep it. The rest were all small boats and were not suitable for use. I went to neighboring villages to ask, but there were no boats. There is only one large ship in Pingxiao village that leaves early and returns late. There is absolutely no reason to keep it. The rest were all small boats and were not suitable for use. I went to neighboring villages to ask, but there were no boats. They had already been booked for others. Grandma was very angry and blamed the family for not deciding in advance, so she started nagging. My mother comforted E and said that the operas in Lu town were much better than those in small villages. We should watch them a few times a year and forget about it today. I was the only one who was so anxious that I almost cried, but my mother tried her best to tell me not to show off, for fear of making Grandma angry again, and she was not allowed to go with others. He said he was afraid that Grandma would be worried. In short, it's over. By the afternoon, all my friends were there, and the play had already started. I seemed to hear the sound of gongs and drums, and knew that they were buying soy milk under the stage. I won't fish for shrimps on this day, and they'll eat less. The mother was very embarrassed and had no idea. By dinner time, my grandmother finally noticed it and said that I should be unhappy. They were too negligent and had no etiquette in hospitality. After dinner, the teenagers who had watched the theater also gathered around. Come and tell the drama happily. Only I remained silent. They all sighed and expressed sympathy. Suddenly, one of the smartest people, Shuangxi, made a suggestion as if he had an enlightenment. He said, "Big ship. Isn't the 8th uncle's ship back?" A dozen other teenagers also had this enlightenment and immediately started to stir up excitement. He said he could take this ship and go with me. I'm happy. However, the grandmother was afraid that they were just children and would not be reliable. The mother also said that if the adults were asked to go with them, they would all have jobs during the day and it would be unreasonable to ask him to stay up late. In this hesitation, Shuangxi could see the truth again, and said loudly, "I guarantee it. The boat is big, Brother Sun never runs around, and we all know the water. It's true. Of the dozen or so young men, none of them knew how to swim, and 2 or 3 were good at it. Grandma and Mother also believed it, so they no longer dismissed it and both smiled. We immediately rushed out of the door. My heavy heart suddenly relaxed, and my body seemed to stretch to an indescribably large size. As soon as you go out. Then I saw a white-covered ship moored in Pingxiao under the moon. Everyone jumped out of the ship and jumped in front for double happiness. The younger ones sat with me in the cabin, and the older ones gathered at the stern. When Mother sent out the instructions to be careful, we had already started the boat. He knocked on the bridge stone, stepped back a few feet, and then stepped forward again to exit the bridge. So we set up 2 oars, one with 2 people each, and they were joking and shouting, along with the sound of the gurgling water from the bow of the boat, in the river with green beans and wheat fields on the left and right. He flew straight towards Zhaozhuang. The fragrance emanating from the beans and wheat on both sides of the river and the water plants at the bottom of the river was mixed with the water vapor and blew towards our faces. The moonlight was dimly reflected in the water vapor. The light black undulating mountains looked like the backbone of an active iron beast. They all ran far away to the stern of the boat, but I thought the boat was slow. They changed hands 4 times, and gradually saw Zhaozhuang vaguely, and seemed to hear a song playing, and there was a few fires. They expected it to be the stage, but maybe it was fishing fires. That sound was probably that of a transverse flute, reverberating. The melodiousness made my heart calm, but I felt lost in myself. I felt like I wanted to be with him in the night air that contained the fragrance of beans, wheat, and algae. The fire was approaching, and it turned out to be a fishing fire. Only then did I remember that the one I saw earlier was not Zhaozhuang either. It was a pine forest directly opposite the bow of the ship. The melodiousness made my heart calm, but I felt lost in myself. I felt like I wanted to be with him in the night air that contained the fragrance of beans, wheat, and algae. The fire was approaching, and it turned out to be a fishing fire. Only then did I remember that the one I saw earlier was not Zhaozhuang either. It was a pine forest directly opposite the bow of the ship. I went there last year and saw a broken stone horse lying on the ground and a stone sheep squatting in the grass. After passing the forest, the boat turned into Cha Harbor, and Zhaozhuang was really in front of us. The most eye-catching thing is a stage standing in the open space facing the river outside the village. The model is in the moonlit night in the distance, almost indistinguishable from space. I suspect that the fairyland I have seen in the painting appears here. At this time, the boat moved faster, and after a while, figures appeared on the stage, moving red and green. The dark things in the river near the stage are the boat awnings of theatergoers. There is nothing empty near the stage, let's watch from a distance. Alpha said. The boat was slowing down at this time, and it arrived soon. As expected, it couldn't get close to the stage, so everyone could only get off the boat. The dark things in the river near the stage are the boat awnings of theatergoers. There is nothing empty near the stage, let's watch from a distance. Alpha said. The boat was slowing down at this time, and it arrived soon. As expected, it couldn't get close to the stage, so everyone could only get off the boat, which was further away than the sacred shed directly opposite the stage. In fact, our ship with a white awning did not want to be in the same place as the ship with a black awning, and there was no open space. In the rush to stop the ship, I saw a black man with a long beard on the platform with a tattoo on his back. 4 flags, holding spears, and a group of shirtless people are fighting. Shuangxi said that it was the famous Taitu Laosheng, who could do 84 somersaults in a row, and he had counted them himself. We all crowded on the bow to watch the battle, but the old man with the iron head didn't do somersaults. Only a few shirtless people did somersaults. After a while, they all got in. Then a xiaodan came out and sang babblingly. Shuangxi said, "There are not many people watching at night, and the old man Tai Tu is slacking off. Who is willing to show off his skills to buy D?" I believe this is right, because there were not many people in the audience at that time, and the country people couldn't bear it for tomorrow's work. Night. Everyone has gone to bed long ago, and the only people standing around are dozens of idle people from this village and neighboring villages. Although the families of the rich people in the awning boat were there, they didn't care about watching the show. Most of them came to the stage to eat cakes, fruits and melon seeds. So it can be considered as nothing. However, I don't really care about watching somersaults. What I most like to see is so it can be considered as nothing. However, I don't really care about watching somersaults. What I most like to see is a snake spirit covered with a white cloth, holding a stick-like snake head on his head in both hands, followed by a jumping tiger wearing a yellow cloth. But after waiting for a long time, no one was seen. Although Xiaodan went in, a very old student came out immediately. I was a little tired and asked Guisheng to buy soy milk. He left for a moment and came back and said, "No." The deaf man selling soy milk also went back. There was some during the day, and I even drank 2 bowls. "Now go and get a ladle of water for you to drink." I didn't drink water, but I kept looking. I couldn't tell what I saw. "Now go and get a ladle of water for you to drink." I didn't drink water, but I kept looking. I couldn't tell what I saw. The younger ones yawned a lot, and the older ones were all minding their own conversations. Suddenly, a clown in a red shirt was tied to a pillar and was beaten with a riding crop by a man with a gray beard. Only then did everyone cheer up and watch with a smile. On this night. I think this is actually the best discount. But Lao Dan finally came out. Lao Dan was what I feared the most, especially when she would sit down and sing. I think this is actually the best discount. But Lao Dan finally came out. Lao Dan was what I feared the most, especially when she would sit down and sing. At this time, I saw that everyone was also disappointed, and I realized that their opinions were consistent with mine. The old lady was just pacing back and forth singing at first, but later she actually sat down on a chair in the middle. I was worried. Shuangxi and the others just murmured curses. I waited patiently, and after a long time, I saw the old lady raise her hand, and I thought she was about to stand up. Unexpectedly, he slowly put it down in the same place and continued singing. Several people in the boat couldn't help but gasp, and the rest also yawned. Shuangxi finally couldn't stand it any longer and said, "I'm afraid he won't finish singing until dawn, so it's better for us to leave." Everyone immediately agreed. As excited as when the boat was sailing, 3 or 4 people ran to the stern of the boat, pulled out their poles, stepped back a few feet, turned the bow, raised the oar, scolded Lao Dan, and headed towards the pine and cypress trees again. The moon has not yet set, as if it had not been long since I watched the play, and as soon as I left Zhaozhuang. The moonlight looked particularly bright again. Looking back at the stage in the light of the lights, it feels as if it had not arrived yet, and it is as misty as a fairy mountain pavilion, covered with red clouds. Another transverse flute blew to my ears, very melodious. I suspected that Lao Dan had already entered. But am embarrassed to say that I'll go back and watch it again. Not long after, the pine trees and cypress trees were already behind the boat, and the boat was not moving slowly, but the surrounding darkness was only thick, indicating that it was already late at night. While they were talking about the actors, scolding or laughing, they were rocking the boat harder. This time the sound of the water rushing on the bow was even louder. The boat was like a big white fish carrying a group of children on its back, jumping in the waves. Even the old fishermen who were fishing at night stopped the boat to watch and cheer. There is still about a mile away from Pingxiao village, but the boat is moving slowly. Those who rocked the boat said they were very tired because they worked too hard and had nothing to eat for a long time. What came to mind was Guisheng, saying that Luohan bean, 7, was in full bloom, and firewood was readily available, so we could steal some for cooking. Everyone agreed and immediately parked the boat near the shore, in the fields on the shore. The oily stools are all solid mangosteen. Fa, this is your family, this is Lao Lu's family, which one should we steal? Shuangxi jumped down first and said